Okay guys, so today I'm doing something a little bit different. I usually show you recipes that I've tried and they're tested and they're family favorites, but today I'm trying something that I've never made before. I never actually heard of this cake until I read about it in a book that my friend wrote. Her name is Emilia Rutigliano, and she has several books, a series. It's called Layers of Veronica, and I'll put a link down below for you guys. If you guys like 50 Shades of Grey, you should love this book. I think these books, they're better. It's not just a romance. There's a lot of culture and travel and all sorts of interesting adventures. But anyway, one of the foods mentioned in one of her books was called an opera cake. There's a cafe in Paris that's famous for it, and I decided to give it a try. So please bear with me if there are fumbles and mistakes, but I just want you to see that, don't be afraid to try new recipes, even if they look a little intimidating. This one is certainly intimidating to me, although when you break it down, it's really not a difficult recipe. There are many steps, and we'll go through it together and see what happens. So what you want to do is preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I have two baker's half sheets that I lined with parchment and sprayed with cooking spray. And I'm going to put those aside, and I have 6 egg whites in my bowl, and you're going to beat them until the soft peaks form, and then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of white granulated sugar and keep beating until I get stiff peaks, and then I'll show you the next step. I forgot to mention that the recipe calls for room temperature eggs, so if you don't want to wait for them to come to room temperature, you can certainly put them in warmish hot water, not boiling, but just for a little while until they become room temperature. So our egg whites are ready, and you can see the stiff peaks there. I added a pinch of cream of tartar. The recipe didn't call for it, but I was kind of concerned about the egg whites keeping their fluff, I guess. Now I have 6 whole eggs that I'm going to combine with 2 cups of almond flour or ground up almonds, blanched, and also 2 1/4 cups of powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar. And you want to beat that for about 3 minutes until it's well combined and light and airy and fluffy. And then I'll show you the next step. So after about 3 minutes, this is what my batter looks like. And the recipe calls for 1/2 cup of white all-purpose flour. So you just want to beat that in until the flour disappears. But here's the thing, the next ingredient that I have is 3 tablespoons of butter. And the recipe says to add that after you incorporate the egg whites, and for some reason that's not sitting with me. Like, I feel like the butter is going to deflate the egg whites if you add it to the batter afterwards. So I'm going to add the butter now. It's melted butter that's cooled a little bit. So I'm going to add it now and pray that it works. Okay, so I've incorporated the flour and the butter, and I'm going to add a little bit, maybe 1/3 of the egg whites, and I'm going to mix them in, and then I'm going to gently fold in the rest of the egg whites. The purpose of adding a little bit of the egg white in first is to lighten the batter. Okay guys, so I'm not a chef, no formal training, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is basically how I fold the egg whites in. You don't want to stir it, you don't want to disturb them too much. Just gently incorporate it. Just want to show you how I do it. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing that, and then I'll show you the next step. So I'm going to leave it at this stage, just a little bit of lumps in there, but I don't want to get rid of all of that air that I've incorporated into the egg whites. So now what you're going to do is divide your dough in half between the 2 baking sheets that you've prepared. And by the way, those sheets are about 12.5 by 15.5 inches. Okay, so I've divided the dough evenly between the 2 baking sheets, and I'm going to put it in the oven for between 5 and 7 minutes, just until it gets golden. Okay, so while my cake is baking, I'm going to make the coffee syrup that's going to go over it. I'm going to double the recipe for the syrup just because I don't want to worry about having enough. I'm not suggesting that you do the same, but that's just what I'm going to do. So if you're not doubling it, it's 1/2 cup of water and 1/3 cup of sugar and 1 1/2 tablespoons of instant espresso. And you just want to cook this until the sugar dissolves. And this is what the instant espresso looks like. You can find it in your coffee aisle. It doesn't have to be this brand. I'm just showing you what it looks like. So I'm just going to cook this until the sugar is dissolved and it's all incorporated. Okay, so I've taken the cakes out, and they don't really spread in the pan. I was kind of hoping they would a little bit and get closer to the edges. This one's a little bit more done than the other. But don't worry so much about the edges because that will be trimmed off. And what you're supposed to do now is I've laid a piece of parchment paper here, and I'm going to do it again for the other cake. But you have to flip the cake onto this piece of parchment and then peel off the parchment that's underneath here, and then flip it over and put it back on top of the cake with the clean side touching the cake. And you want to do this while the cake is warm, I'm assuming, so that it doesn't stick to the parchment. Okay, so you see I've flipped it over onto the piece of parchment that I had on the counter, and now I'm peeling this back, and I'm just flipping it over to the other side. And then you're supposed to let it cool like this to room temperature with both pieces of parchment on it. Okay guys, so I tried the recipe for the coffee buttercream that I found online, and it was a total fail, and I contemplated whether to show you or not. I don't want to waste your time and confuse you, so I'm going to show you my buttercream recipe. Hopefully it'll be enough buttercream and not way too much. So you want to start with 3/4 cups of whole milk and 1/2 cup of granulated white sugar. I'm going to heat this up almost to a boil, and then I'll show you the next step. Make sure you stir the milk a little bit just to dissolve the sugar in there. I've whisked together 4 egg yolks. Hopefully you've saved the yolks from the egg whites that we used previously. I hope you watched this video before you started making it, or at least read through the recipe. Once your sugar is completely dissolved, your milk should be pretty hot. You don't really have to boil it. I'm going to very slowly add it into my egg mixture and whisk it together. And then I'm going to put it back in this pot, and we're going to put it back on the flame. So once you have it back in the pot, you want to constantly stir it or whisk it over a medium-low flame. Just make sure you don't get scrambled eggs. You want it to thicken just a little bit. Okay guys, I just want to show you the bottom of the pot and kind of the consistency of the egg mixture here. I have scrambled it before, so you know, don't lose hope if you do. You can start over. Just a couple of egg yolks. So now you're going to beat this with a mixer until your egg mixture cools down completely, and then you're going to add 3 sticks of butter, softened, room temperature, unsalted butter. Okay, so now the eggs have cooled, and I've put the 3 sticks of butter in there, but they kind of sank to the bottom, but believe me, there's 1.5 cups of butter in there, and now I'm just going to whip it together. Okay, so here it is after I've whipped it together. And now all you do is, I've combined 3 tablespoons of instant espresso with 3 tablespoons of hot water. I'm going to add that in there, and I'm going to mix that in, and then you're just going to chill it for a little bit. Okay, so for the ganache, you want to take 1/4 cup of heavy cream and 1/2 cup of whole milk, and bring it almost to a boil like this. And you're going to turn it off. And I'm going to pour it over 8 ounces of dark chocolate. Here's my chocolate all chopped up really fine, little pieces. The smaller you cut it up, the easier it will melt. And now you're just going to pour it over and let it sit for a little bit, don't touch it, and then you'll stir it after about a minute, I guess. Okay, so after a minute you stir in the chocolate with the milk and the cream. And now I'm going to beat it with a mixer, and I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of softened, unsalted butter. So this is what the ganache looks like right now. It's kind of liquid. I'm going to put it in the fridge for about 20 minutes, stirring it every few minutes occasionally, you know, so you don't want it to get too stiff. Okay, so now for the fun part, we're going to assemble it. I've taken one of the 2 sheets of cake, and I cut it 10-inch square. Approximately. And I'm going to drizzle it with that coffee syrup that we made. Just brush the top of it, and then I'll show you the next step. I just want to point out that the cake has 2 sides. One side is smoother, and then this side has the pores in it. So you want to flip it over so that the pores are facing up. This way it absorbs the coffee syrup better. And I'm just going to take a brush and soak it with the coffee syrup. Soak the cake with the coffee syrup, and now I'm going to spread about 3/4, maybe a little bit more of the buttercream. And then you're going to put it in the fridge, maybe for 20 minutes, just to set the buttercream, make it nice and cold. So I've spread the coffee buttercream, and now I'm going to put it in the refrigerator. So our cake has had some time to set in the fridge, And our ganache as well. See, it's nice and spreadable consistency now, whereas it was kind of liquid and runny before. So we're going to put the next layer of the cake on, and the second layer is going to consist of 2 halves. Each is a piece left over from each of the original 2 sheets of cake. Basically you cut 10 inches and then you're going to be left with about 5, and with the other one the same. So you'll have 2 5-inch pieces that we're going to lay over this right now. Okay, so I've laid down the 2 pieces here. Now, once again, you're going to brush the top with the coffee syrup. And once you've done that, you're going to spread the ganache all over. Once you've spread the ganache, all of it, over the second layer, you're going to put the final layer of cake on top. And once again, you want your pores to be on top, and you're going to brush it with the coffee syrup. So now that I've brushed the final layer of cake with the coffee syrup, I'm going to spread a little bit of the buttercream over the top. You don't want to go too heavy. You just want to use the buttercream to smooth out the top layer, and then I'm going to put it in the freezer for a little bit. So this is what it looks like before I put it in the freezer, and I just want to show you this tool that I have. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's great for evening out the frosting, and it's also great for lifting up cakes when you want to move them. So I'm going to put this in the freezer for a little bit, and we'll get working on the glaze. So for the chocolate glaze, you want to melt 1 stick of butter, which is half a cup. You don't want to do it over a high flame. You don't want to scorch it or burn it. You just want to melt it. And once it comes to a boil, you'll turn it off, and you'll skim off the foam off the top to clarify the butter. So here you have the foam, and I'm just going to use my skimmer to remove it, and then I'm going to pour the clarified butter into a small bowl. Now I have a bowl set over a pot with some boiling water, and you don't want the water to touch your bowl, but you just want to melt 5 ounces of chocolate. And unfortunately I'm using Hershey's dark chocolate because that's all they had in the store, but if I was making this cake again, I would definitely use a much better chocolate. Veronica is a great chocolate. You know, the better the quality of your ingredients, the better your final product. So I'm just going to stir this over the double boiler until it melts. So once your chocolate has melted, be careful because the bowl will get hot, and you want to use a metal bowl, not a plastic one. You don't want to melt it. I'm going to add the clarified butter in, and I'm going to mix it in, and then I'll show you the next step. I've taken my cake, and I've used this tool that I just showed you earlier to help slide it onto a cooling rack, and I set the rack over the parchment paper and the tray that I had it in earlier. And now what you're going to do is just pour the glaze over the top, and I'm going to do it off camera. And then you're just going to want to smooth it out. Again, you can use this tool or you can use a spatula, and I'll show you the final step. Okay, so I've spread the glaze, and this is going to take practice, I guess, to get it, you know, perfect. But it's good enough for me. I'm going to put it in the freezer, and after a little while, we're going to take it out and cut it up. So the cake has set in the freezer, and now I'm going to trim the edges and cut it into rectangles. Make sure to clean your knife in between cutting. You really want to keep the layers inside as clean as possible. So this is what it looks like once you trim off the edges and on the inside. It's all about the layers. Isn't it beautiful? And here's a piece here on a plate. Our finished product. You could decorate it with a little bit of gold foil, or you could write the word opera on top with a little buttercream, or you could just leave it like this. It's up to you. I hope you enjoy.